Good morning, and can I welcome everyone to the third meeting of the Public Petitions Committee in 2021. The meeting ran because I will be here on audio only, but the rest of the members are not visible. The only item on our agenda today is the consideration of continued petitions. And the first petition on our agenda today is petition 1517, polypropylene mesh medical devices, by Elaine Holmes and Olive McElroy on behalf of Scottish Mesh Survivors, Hear Our Voice campaign. And I'm welcoming Jackson Carlow and Neil Finlay for this petition. I understand that John Scott may be joining us, but hasn't joined us so far, but I know he has had an interest in the petition in the past. So the petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to suspend use of polypropylene transvaginal mesh procedures, to initiate a public inquiry and/or comprehensive independent research to evaluate the safety of mesh devices using all evidence available, including that from across the world, introduce mandatory reporting of all adverse incidents by health professionals, set up a Scottish transvaginal mesh implant register with a view to linking this up with national and international registers, introduce fully informed consent with uniformity throughout Scotland's health boards, and 6, write to the MHRA and ask that they reclassify TVM devices to heighten alert status to reflect ongoing concerns worldwide. The petition was last considered in October 2020 when we took evidence from Dr Veronica's, and since that evidence session we have received submissions from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, the then Interim Chief Medical Officer, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists and the petitioners. In their submissions, the Cabinet Secretary and the then Interim Chief Medical Officer highlight actions that the Scottish Government is taking to work with mesh-injured women to improve the National Specialist Service, establish close working relationships with the equivalent services being developed by NHS England, consider what further steps can be taken to provide additional options for patients, including referrals outside of the NHS, and take a proposal to the UK Medical Education Reference Group, which is the first step in the current process for submitting proposals for a GMC-regulated credential with respect to mesh removal surgery. In their submission, the petitioners reiterate that they do not believe there is a safe and proven treatment route in Scotland. As such, they are calling on the Scottish Government to fund women so that they can travel to the US to be treated by a surgeon they trust and choose if that is their wish. Petitioners also call for the Scottish Government to refund the small number of women who have already paid life savings to attend surgeons in the US. Since the publication of our papers, we have received a submission from Dr Agur, which notes that he has helped to develop the West of Scotland pelvic mesh complications pathway. He describes this care pathway as the most comprehensive for mesh-injured women in Scotland and states that it is being considered by government officials for national use. He also states that for most deeply embedded mesh devices, other than vertical retropublic mesh devices, he does not expect members of the mesh multidisciplinary team to be confident that the surgical skills are adequate for total device removal in a safe and effective manner in Scotland. He believes that until the service builds expertise and trust in this area, a funded out-of-country referral pathway to the US or to England should be put in place for women who wish to use it. So obviously this is a petition that we've looked at in some detail, and I'm going to invite our visitor MSPs to make a contribution first before I ask the committee members to reflect on what we should be doing now with this petition. So call Jackson Carlow MSP first.
Thank you, Convener. This has been a petition which has had international as well as national significance, and I understand it's run now since the last Parliament, when I was a member of the Petitions Committee. And I can see, looking at the petition itself, that many of the requests within the petition have themselves subsequently been responded to, if still not to the satisfaction of the women concerned. However, at the end of a Parliament, the Health Secretary herself is set to retire. As we move into the next Parliament, I think given the huge continuing international significance and the fact that there are key areas which I accept could be the subject of a subsequent petition in due course that still remain to be resolved, not least the request of the women subsequently to have the treatment carried out in the United States by Dr. Veronicas, from whom we heard compelling testimony back in October, that it would be, in my view, and I recall actually a precedent with a petition that was promoted by Gil Patterson over 2 or 3 parliaments in respect of the St Margaret of Scotland Hospice in Clydebank. And the Petitions Committee, and I remember being a member of it at the time, felt that it would be wise to keep the petition open in order to ensure that many of the things which have been suggested will happen did in fact happen, and that there was an opportunity to ensure in the subsequent Parliament that the commitments that had been received in the previous one were still those that were going to be actively pursued by the government of the day. So while I accept there has been a lot of progress, I would very much hope, Convener, that the committee would agree to keep the petition live, to allow the next Parliament to consider it afresh, and for actions then, with a whole Parliament ahead, to dictate the correct course of action.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And can I also welcome John Scott, who's now joined us, but I'll call Neil Findlay and then I'll ask John Scott after that. Neil Findlay.
Thanks, Convener. The petition came forward because, frankly, out of exasperation by the Scottish Mesh campaigners, working with them over a number of years, we tried every parliamentary trick and campaigning trick in the book to advance the cause and bring about the ban on mesh. And when that was exhausted, my office advised them to take forward a petition, and I want to thank Tommy Kane, who worked with me at that time, for the work he put into the petition along with the Scottish Mesh survivors. And I think it was the right move, because it was only by taking forward the petition that we had that very moving and, I would say, electrifying moment at the committee that the then convener Dave Stewart described as one of the most emotional meetings he had been at, when the room was packed, and that we, by women and their families, and we saw the ban being announced. Now, that ban or that suspension is only a temporary measure, and is only there because initially the Health Secretary Alex Neil announced it, and Jean Freeman continued it. There is no legislation in place to enforce that ban, and that is one of the key criteria of the petition. So therefore, I think we should be continuing with the petition. We need that ban to be a permanent ban on mesh, and we know that within the medical establishment there is a strong desire to start implanting mesh again. Many of the people who recommended its implantation in women in the first place, the implantation has caused so much harm, believed nothing was done wrong. They believe in this product. They think that was the right move, and they would do it again tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So the petition asked for a ban. We have a temporary suspension. It asked for a public inquiry. There hasn't been one. It asked for mandatory reporting. Well, is mandatory reporting being adhered to? There are real questions about that. It asked for a mesh register. Has that been introduced, and is it working? And they asked for informed consent and reclassification. And subsequent to that, they have asked for things like the opportunity to travel abroad, to have treatment from someone that they trust and someone that they have confidence in their skills. At the moment, what is happening, we're establishing a so-called specialist mesh centre in Glasgow that will be staffed by the very people who recommended the implantation of the mesh in the first place. Now, I would say to committee members, to consider this, that if you had been recommended for a procedure that you were told was a 20-minute procedure that was the gold standard in treatment and would be life-changing, well, yes, it was life-changing, devastatingly life-changing. That was what they were told by the surgeons one or some of whom, and the consultants who will be in this, running this new mesh centre. Now, I have to ask, would you go to that centre if those people were who are running it are the ones who recommended the implantation in the first place? So I think there are real concerns about that, whether that is going to be a waste of money, whether anyone will have confidence in it to go and have treatment. And at the moment we have a very significant issue, and that is women who have been told by surgeons in Scotland that they have had a full mesh removal, only to find out later that they haven't, and that they still have mesh within their body. And that has been proven by some of them travelling to the US, having crowdfunded or used their life savings, sold possessions, or whatever to fund that trip, and they have found that they have had mesh in them, despite being told that it's all been removed. The Canadian government have paid for some of their citizens, over 100 of their citizens, to travel to the US for treatment from Dr. Veronicas, and that money has been refunded, paid, and I think we should be doing that here now. Finally, I would say that many of the women have gone through every hoop possible to get the treatment that they want, and have got nowhere with it. They have applied for treatment out with the UK, and the government said they would look at that, but they have not had any reply, or any positive reply, to say that that would be the case. So my plea would be to keep the petition open. There are so many question marks that still remain, and I hope that the committee will take this forward in the next Parliament, because some of us are departing the stage.
Thank you very much. Neil, and can I call John Scott?
Thank you very much, Convener, and I apologise for my late arrival. But I would just like to compliment what has been said by others, by Jackson Carlaw and Neil Findlay. And I would begin by saying I too think the petition should be kept live. I welcome very much the work of the committee. I was one of the people who drew attention to this problem very early on in this whole debacle. It can be described in no other way. So I welcome the work of Jackson Carlaw and Neil Findlay and Alec Neil, who have carried that torch and banner in a particularly strong and worthwhile way. One also has to congratulate the survivors, as it were, on their forbearance. And I agree with Jackson Carlaw and Neil Findlay that the petition should be kept live for the reasons that they have already stated. I think also that there should be an inquiry of some sort. I'm not certain of what sort, but I think there should be an inquiry into this because, as Neil Findlay has pointed out, there are still doctors who believe that this is a solution, and there are also doctors who don't. So there is dubiety about the whole situation, and it really should be bottomed out and guidelines clearly established, and more clearly established, in my view, than they currently are. I, like others, perhaps, am aware of women now travelling to America as they can't get treatment here in this country. So I very much regret the pain and suffering that these women have had to go through. And perhaps if this treatment is not available for removal of mesh here in this country, a fund should be established either at a UK level or at a Scottish level for women to travel to America to get the treatment, to get mesh removed where it's appropriate. It's unreasonable that women are left in pain and discomfort and worse through no fault of their own. And so I would like to see that resolved, and therefore that it's imperative that this petition is kept live and into the next Parliament. But in the meantime, I congratulate and thank others who have done a great deal of work on this. Thanks, Convener. That's really all I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that there is no doubt the extent to which the survivors have had an impact on anyone who has heard what has happened. I think anyone who's been a member of the Public Petitions Committee or been engaged in campaigning, or the current members of the committee, it's had a huge impact on them. And I certainly will always remember the evidence sessions where women had come and were responding and reacting to what they were hearing, and I found that just very, very powerful. And in the middle of their own suffering, being able, I think, to make the case and show what had happened. I was also very concerned, as I think was on the record, that what seems to have happened with Dr. Veronicas, who was offering to be supportive and helpful and to come here, it was then treated as if he was applying for a job and he had to prove himself to be appropriate to come, and I found that just disrespectful. And so I think there are a lot of things around this issue that have to continue. There are very focused issues around this whole question of supporting women to go to America. What the question I think here today that we're wrestling with as a committee is whether this petition in its current form allows us the space to drive on those questions, or whether a more focused petition brought in immediately after the new Parliament starts could allow that focus. But I hear very much the strength of feeling about the importance of the issue continuing to be in the forefront of the mind of the Parliament and the government, and the question is how best to do that. And actually, I think what some of this flags up is because, and maybe this is where the case is strongest for retention, that the experience of the women throughout this process, and indeed throughout the period when it's been on in the Petitions Committee, is that something is said but is not followed through, and or that people feel let down. We don't know the whole story around the review and so on. So that lack of confidence and lack of trust, I think, is a thing that we're really wrestling with, because we do want to make sure that it's it continues to have a real focus. But you know, the gap between what was said about Dr. Veronicas and what was done, it's really, you know, is one of the issues that certainly I found difficult. But I'm going to ask committee members to comment, and then we'll try and come to a conclusion. And I'm not going to preclude anybody from not coming back in. So I'm conscious it's such an important issue. But I'll call Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. I know exactly what you mean, and I have wrestled with this one ever since it came to us when I first started on this committee. And you know, I've listened to the debates in chamber. I've met some of the women when they came in, and was really struck with their bravery and determination to see this go to a conclusion. I have absolutely no doubt that there needs to be some sort of compensation fund. These women need to be given the respect, and it was, you know, and our three visiting MSPs, I want to thank them. Their evidence is really important to us as well. I do agree with the statement that says that it's very difficult now for the women to trust any of the surgeons in Scotland, and, you know, will they want to participate in this centre? A lot of them have said that they're not happy with that. They're not happy with the way that the government have included them in discussions. I agree there is a complete breakdown of trust, and Dr. Veronicas's evidence last year was absolutely devastating. We had a really good discussion with him. He is at a loss to understand why this procedure is even being used anymore. I think, unfortunately, bridges have been burnt with getting him over here. So I really do believe that the only situation that we are left with is getting those women over to him. How that happens, again, Convener, I'm with you. I really don't believe that it should take a petition in order for something like that to happen. I think that that should be something that should be happening anyway. But as you said yourself, do we get that with this petition that's currently before us? It's not included in it. So we now have a difficult decision whether to say, as our visiting MSPs have said, do we keep it open in order to address the specific points that haven't been addressed? A public inquiry, I totally agree, should be front and centre of this as well. I would tend to say, and I know that when you say closure of a petition, it sounds like we have addressed everything. We absolutely haven't. We know this. But I think that if we're going to fight on the compensation side, on the funding side for these women to go and get the procedures in America, there needs to be another petition. Now, whether we allow this petition to continue to monitor what's going on, what the government have said is happening with the Safety Commissioner and the Health and Social Care Alliance, etc., or whether we close it and ask the petitioners to come back with a far more focused petition that looks at the public inquiry, looks at the compensation, looks at giving these women the money back that they have spent their life savings on going over there already. I would think that that would be more effective, but I do look to my other committee members to see what their opinions are. But I certainly think that we would get further if we were to look at a new petition now, a refreshed petition and a more focused petition.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I fully agree with what my colleague has just said, Gail Ross, on most of the points. And I also thank my fellow MSPs who've come on board, Neil Finney-Jackson, Carl and John Scott, who gave some very interesting information. They've been at this a long time. I'm extremely reluctant to let this go, and in other words, to close it, because I have a fear that it will get lost somewhat in the ether. And therefore, out of sight, out of mind. I think we've gone a long way with this. I accept the refocusing of a petition, but there's no reason why we can't refocus some of our research in it as a committee and look further and deeper into some of the processes and issues that have come up from the evidence we've heard, and even heard today from our three colleague MSPs. Yes, there should be a fund for the mesh survivors to get procedures done in the USA. That's important, and that is extremely urgent. We want to remove them from having a poor quality of life and the pain they've gone through. We need to give them trust in procedures, and therefore the trust in the procedure is held in the United States. Dr. Veronica's evidence is very clear, and it's appalling the way that he's been treated by the Scottish Government in relation to his expertise, and the indignity of it was appalling. I think there should be a public inquiry. And I say, I therefore am reluctant to have this petition closed, full stop. I think we can do more and be more intelligent in getting some more mileage out of this and look at it deeper and obviously pull various aspects of the petition if we need to have, obviously we need to have more evidence. So those are my points. I'm not in favour of closing it. I'm in favour of keeping it open because once not seen, it's forgotten, and that's what my concern is. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. As somebody who was a member of the Public Petitions Committee in the last session of Parliament, I'm really deeply disappointed that this has not been resolved by now. We went to European Parliament to give evidence on mesh implants. We have taken evidence of several cabinet secretaries now who have promised to resolve issues here. So for all mesh survivors, I can only apologise that this has not been resolved and it's taken so long. to achieve anything. I don't know if we should close the petition or not. I actually, like Gail Ross, I think if we came back with a new petition focused on exactly the points that need to be resolved now, I think that might be better. But I am open to suggestions from the committee, because this is an extremely difficult petition for anybody who's on the committee to make a decision on this. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. And Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. I mean, like my colleagues, we have all experienced the evidence being given by various groups and vested interests in this petition. Medical treatments and the like are all to do with trust, and where that trust breaks down, blame starts being bandied around. And this debate has been marred throughout by the perceived and self-conflicting interests of medical and advisory groups and organisations, leading to attitudes and behaviour which has been quite shocking. Certainly, there are various issues here which have not been resolved. In fact, very little progress has actually been made. And this is because this trust has, of almost everybody has broken down. In order to make sure that these things are carried through completely, if we had another 4 years of Parliament, the Petitions Committee could refocus on the key issues. But we don't have that luxury at this moment. But on the other hand, we must make sure that the various issues are carried forward in some way. So closing at this stage will take another 2 or 3 years into a new Parliament before these issues can be recomplied. So I think my view is we keep it open in order to carry through the issues and signal very clearly what the issues are still to be resolved, and make sure that the new committee in the new Parliament focuses on these issues very quickly in their agenda. Therefore, although it will be difficult because the various women groups will be left still in limbo over a few months, but the quickest way for them to get on focus will be to keep it open so the new Parliament could address it immediately they arrive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I noticed that Neil Finlay was wanting to come back in.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, just to advise, there has been zero contact with Dr. Veronicas since the Cabinet Secretary made previous comments, and you know, I think that could have been resolved. I think that could have been redeemed, but there seems to have been no effort made, and that is very, very disappointing. I think the committee can do what it wants, but the committee could write to the government calling for a public inquiry. The committee could write to the government calling for a scheme of funding to be put in place to allow the women to go and get the surgery, and they could call for a refund scheme as well. I don't think that requires another petition. And my caution against another petition is it takes a lot of energy to go through this procedure. A lot of the women are in physical pain, and a lot of them do not work because of their condition. Therefore, starting all of this again, whilst I'm sure they would do it, I think, you know, it requires a lot to get that to the situation we are today. And it also, as the committee knows more than anybody, it takes a lot of time. So I think we would really be going back to square one, where I think continuing with the petition and making demands of the government, or writing to the government asking what they're doing on a number of issues, would be a better way to go.
Thanks. Gail Ross?
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I totally get where Neil Finlay's coming from. And I mean, in mentioning a new petition, I absolutely do not want to put these women through, you know, anything that repeats what they've gone through already, and I completely understand that it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to do something as important as this. I will take a bit of advice, but as far as I'm aware, we can only work on what the petition actually asks us to do. And the petition doesn't mention the compensation or the funding scheme. That was the basis of wanting, to go to a new petition, not to give anybody else any more work or to draw out. Well, yes, actually, to draw out. I just feel that if we continue with this petition and we write to the government, we're just really going to get the same answers to the same questions. And if we focus it down a lot more and we're able then to ask them, will you provide a compensation scheme as per a new petition, they are going to be forced into answering that specific question. That was where I was coming from. But happy to take advice on the specific. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We can see that what we're wrestling with here is not whether we think these women have been treated really badly, or that there is a great deal more to do. And I think on balance, on the committee, we can see that the argument round holding on to the petition is also strong. We should recognise the progress that the women have made, that there has been commitments made, there has been change, there's clearly a long way to go. And I certainly think it is possible to hold on to the petition. We recognise that there's actually been a lot of work done by the clerks alongside the petition as well over a period in trying to facilitate and support them in progressing this. We shouldn't think that the only place these issues should be discussed is in the Public Petitions Committee, but the concern is that the rest of the parliamentary process makes it much more difficult to pull people back in, to challenge them on what they've said before. Because we did bring a minister in, we brought in the chief medical officer at the time and so on. We in the petitioners had control of that agenda in the way in which, if it goes out into the parliamentary process more generally, where it will obviously always be discussed, there's less control over that. So I feel as if I'm thinking this out loud, but my feeling is that a new petition, we do need the new petition in order for us to pursue with the government why they're not prepared to have a compensation scheme, they're not prepared to fund people to go to America. That can be done, and it could be done immediately, because in the normal run of things you have to wait a year, but because of the election, it can be done immediately. It may be that we should hold on to the petition as a bridge into that new petition, so that we are still saying these issues around where is the public inquiry, where is the building trust, and so on, are these issues being addressed, but have a petition after that, which then focuses directly on this really serious question about the lack of confidence. Even if they sort out and get a centre, as has already been said, women will choose not to use it. So my feeling is that, and a number of people have indicated want to come in, and I'm going to call them, but that is my sense that there is a limited ban to this petition now. There are new areas that we need to focus on, and only really what we're trying to wrestle with just now is how do we make sure we hold on to the general momentum as well as in the focus on the specific issues as well. I'll call Maurice Corrie.
I'm muted. Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'm very moved by Neil Finlay's points about pushing on the key points and focus points with the Scottish Government. And this follows on from my question and my great concern of out of sight is out of mind. And I agree, Convener, with you about the bridging. I do still think we need to keep this one open. There is absolutely no problem why that shouldn't be the case. We have to keep the government's feet to the fire. There is no question about that. And yes, a new petition I'd welcome, focused on various points, and again, points that Neil Finlay raised, and in particular, obviously, saying the fund for mesh survivors to get procedures done in the States, trust, restoring trust in the procedure, and also a public inquiry. That can be put in a new one, but let's keep this one open. We need to keep the feet to the fire. and absolutely don't have any question of it being out of sight, out of mind. It is not fair on the survivors, and we owe it to them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. Neil Findlay mentioned earlier about it being time-consuming to write a new petition. I'm just wondering, because there's so specific points here to bring a new petition forward in the new Parliament, if the clerks could give the petitioners a hand and help them to write it, to get these points as accurate as possible, so you could hold the government to account. Thank you, Convener.
I think that the important point to remember is that clerks do work with petitioners to make sure that their petition is it meets all the criteria, and they will be supportive, but nevertheless it would still have to be for the petitioners to do that. Otherwise, you know, that I think they would be blurring the roles. But I understand what you mean, and I think there's plenty of evidence of how supportive the clerking team has been with petitioners over many years to make sure that they're able to engage with the process. I call John Scott, sorry.
Very much, Convener, for letting me to come back in. And I too would pay tribute to the clerks over many years, not just in this petition, but generally. They are assiduous beyond measure, and I could only agree with you in that regard. I would just say that I think the petition should be kept open, as you say, as a bridge, a new term perhaps, but nonetheless important, because it might be hard to bring forward a new petition if the rules were to change in the Scottish Parliament or anything like that. So I very much think that we should keep this petition open, and I'm also of the view that you should keep control of it, but the Petitions Committee should keep control of it, but that it should, notwithstanding, a way should be found to bring it to the attention of the Health Committee, and perhaps they could reflect on this before the dissolution of Parliament and put it in their legacy document that perhaps an inquiry should be held urgently by the Health Committee as an adjunct or in addition to the work done by the Petitions Committee. It might perhaps go over old ground, but it might perhaps not, because times have moved on. But I do think that there needs to be, at the very least, further pressure put on government to do better, to put it at its mildest, than they have done previously, and honour the promises that they have made that have been broken. So they need another opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that my sense is that the consensus is that the significance of the petition's existence and the progress it's made so far is such that we don't want to let it go. There's a lack of, we would not want anybody to think that the Parliament believes this matter is concluded. And it's not just about the funding issue, although that's a really important one. It's really how over a long period of time, the gap between what is supposed to happen and actually happens is quite different. So I think that's my sense is where the committee has got to. But we're also clear that there's a lot more to be done. And on balance, my view that it remains with the committee because the Public Petitions Committee is entirely, its agenda is entirely decided by petitioners. So if we referred it, for example, to the Health and Social Care Committee, they have conflicting and other issues. We very often do refer to other committees, but we know that in doing so, it's then for them to decide what priority it would be given. And I think that, again, is an anxiety for us. But I think we should write to the Health and Social Care Committee, as John Scott suggests, saying these are still remaining, and we do think this maybe is something they want to reflect on in their legacy paper. It's certainly something that we can reflect on too. And I do think we should be writing to the Cabinet Secretary really to express the view there are ongoing issues around this about rebuilding confidence, and it can't just be a recycling of the same responses, but flagging up to them the extent to which this is really now an issue of confidence and trust. And that the whole, to say, oh, well, yes, we could look at out-of-country referrals is not quite the same thing as the commitment to work with Dr. Veronicas. There's quite a big gap there, I think. And I think that would be useful, and perhaps, again, reflecting that these are now the kind of views that are being presented to us around the need for a substantial inquiry. We know there's been work done elsewhere, and the extent to which the Scottish Government relates to that work would be useful too. So I think, and I'm happy to hear from anybody who feels that we're not doing the right thing here, but that we would agree to keep the petition open, but it is in a desire to see progress, and it would be for the new Public Petitions Committee to make a decision about how that progress is going to be made. So it doesn't just simply become a symbolic thing that we keep it open, but there is a focus on particular areas, and the clerks in discussion with the petitioners will be quite clear about what areas we can't pursue unless there's a further petition, the areas that we can. I'm not sure if there is agreement to that. I think that would be what we would want to do. Gail Ross? Okay. I'll call Gail Ross and then John Mason.
Thanks, Convener. I think that given the importance and the timescales that we're looking at, if we're going to write to the Cabinet Secretary, then we should definitely include the compensation, the funding, the potential to get these women over to America, just to see if we can get an initial bit of feedback, or to see where they are on that specific issue. And if we do get some feedback on that, it may well be that there doesn't need to be an additional petition. So I would quite like to pop that in there, and at the very least, it gives the Scottish Government a view of the intention. Thanks.
Thank you. And Tom Mason?
Yes, Convener. I worry a little in terms of parts of what you're suggesting in terms of an inquiry. The danger of inquiries is it looks backwards and becomes a blame game. And I think what has been missing from the whole process is this area of trust on all parties. And unless we make sure that the method we use going forward it allows for if you like, a new view as to what's going on, to make sure that the trust is rebuilt. Because at the moment, the entrenched positions of the women on one side, the surgeons on another side, Dr. Veronicas on another, all have their positions, but we must make sure that the atmosphere of the forward situation is positive and looking forward, not looking backwards and to attain a blamed situation. And hopefully, within whoever is in government on the new in control in the new Parliament, so a new beginning can take place. Thank you.
I mean, I think that is always the balance of argument that people have to make when they look to have a public inquiry. Does it take resource that could be used in another way? I mean, these are always a balance of judgment. So I think what the committee wants really is that for people to understand what happened, and as a consequence make decisions in the future about what should happen. So Neil Findlay makes the point about it's not really a ban currently, it's a temporary suspension. So in that sense, I think the inquiry, that's what its focus should be, I certainly think so, but that's not necessarily where we're wanting to go at the moment. The fact of the matter is that there is work getting done on this. I suppose one of the things that is mentioned is, they're developing a national specialist service. If there's any possibility of that, asking the Scottish Government to reiterate its commitment to working with the petitioners and the women who are survivors, and then understanding that brings these other questions with it. So I don't think anybody else wanting to come in. So I think we are agreeing to continue the petition, to look at writing to the Health Committee and to the Cabinet Secretary, flagging up, the impact of some of the the decisions perhaps not being pursued in the way that we'd want, and recognising, I think, the point that Neil Findlay has made, that women are still suffering, and there are still, serious questions about how they got to that, how that was allowed to happen, and to what extent government is understanding that that is really the really serious matter here. So with that, I think we're agreeing to continue the petition, to ask to write to the Cabinet Secretary and to the Health Committee, but in writing to the Cabinet Secretary, I'm mindful of the point that Gail Ross made, that we should be asking for a response from them directly on this whole question of compensation and funding referrals out of country and to America, if that's agreed and acceptable. Okay, in that case, thanks very much. Thank you to our visitor colleagues, and we'll obviously continue this conversation as we go forward. But with that, can I thank you, and we'll move on to the next continued petition, which is petition 1707, Public Access Defibrillators by Kathleen Orr. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a requirement for all new build or newly renovated or repurposed buildings with a floor space of over 7,500 metres squared to have a public access defibrillator fitted to the exterior of the building for public use, and for the pads to be officially registered. At the last consideration of this petition, the committee took evidence from stakeholders. Following this session, the committee wrote to the Minister for Public Health, Sport and Wellbeing. A response has now been received from the Minister, as well as a written submission from the petitioner, and these responses are summarised in the clerk's note. I think, again, this is an important petition, and we know that the petitioner emerges from a deeply tragic experience for a family, and I certainly would want to record my thanks to the petitioner for all the work she's doing, and the people round about her they're doing, to make sure that people have more awareness and of these issues, and actually making a difference to people's lives, that people will be able to be helped if we all understood better how to use a defibrillator, if we all understood where they were, that you could access them. I think the intention in this petition is very powerful, and I know there's been a lot of work already done, and there's huge success in that. The only question we need to now consider is whether is there anything further we can do, or whether the fact that these issues are now really have been given a lot of focus and attention, while the specific request on the size of buildings and so on is not something that people supported. It is also clear that it's now a members' bill highlighting this whole question of mandatory registration, and that might be something that would allow this work to continue. But I'm going to call Maurice Corrie first.
Thank you, Gavina. Yes, I agree with the points you're making there. I think as from the evidence we've gathered and the various reports we've had in, I think it's important now really that we close this petition under Rule 15.7 Standing Orders on the basis that the majority of witnesses the committee has heard from during the evidence session did not agree with the aim of the petition to place the public access defibrillators in all new or newly renovated buildings with a floor space of 7,500 square metres. Also, the important factor is, and you mentioned this, Convener, is the fact that there is a members' bill seeking the mandatory regulation and registration of automated external defibrillators has actually already been lodged in Parliament. So I think really we are in the position now that we can safely close this petition, knowing that there is some progress being made in the right areas and more focused. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I support what my colleague says. I'm quite happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, because there has been progress made. There is a private member's bill, and more importantly, the evidence taken before the committee did not agree with what was called in the petition. So I'm happy to close it, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues. We've managed to generate a debate around this issue, and the petition is not supported by a number of witnesses, and we do have a private amendments bill, so I think closing it is a sensible thing to do at this stage.
Thank you. And Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. I think there's a wider issue rather than just the big buildings need a DFIB. I mean, we went into quite a lot of evidence with the Scottish Ambulance Service, and we've had quite a lot of evidence about training and first aid in schools and locked cabinets after 5 o'clock at night. I mean, we really did expand quite widely into the whole issue. I was content with what I've heard. There is work ongoing by the Scottish Ambulance Service. There is a private members bill, as has been noted, and I really hope that that gets to its full conclusion in the short time that we have left. It was good to see the evidence from the petitioner that she's happy with the work undertaken in her local area. I would be happy to see that nationwide. I think that's an ongoing piece of work, but I am happy that the conversation has at least been started. It's becoming more and more a focus for groups in local areas. So I am content to close as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that I think Gail makes a very important point that actually the evidence we took did highlight the areas which also need to be addressed. And I think that the petitioner has played an important point in that discussion being pushed forward, that where there are so many groups who are raising funds, we want to make sure that when they raise funds and a DFIB is bought, that it then can be used and that people are confident in using it. And I think that really important bigger conversation has been prompted and informed by this petition being in front of us. And I think we can therefore agree to close the petition, to commend the petitioner on everything that she's done in this regard. I know she will continue to do, and those people who look to what she has done and are now responding to that in their own local communities. And I do think it's important that whether it is Emma Sarwar's bill or whether it's government, whatever that might be, that there has to be this important recognition that A, people need to know where they are, and B, they need to be maintained, and that we would hope that those who have a responsibility for this will make sure that it's continued. And we'd want to thank the petitioner very much for everything she's done so far and will, I have no doubt, continue to do. If we can move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1722, parking charges at Island Lifeline ferryports, lodged by Dr. Shona Ruman on behalf of Iona and Mull Community Councils and others. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to island-proof transport infrastructure to ensure that public bodies do not charge for parking in car parks at island ferryports, which are essential lifeline services, and any proposed island parking charges are subject to rigorous impact assessment. This petition was last considered by the committee on the 12th of November 2020. At that meeting, the committee took evidence from the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands. Since this meeting, the committee has received written evidence from the Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands and the petitioner. As requested by the committee, the Minister provided a list of island communities' impact assessment work carried out in the spirit of the 2018 Act before they were formally introduced. He also advised that discussions would take place at the Island Strategic Group with Islands Authorities leaders and chief executives on 9 December 2020 regarding parking charges at Lifeline ferryports, and that he would provide an update on this. To date, despite repeated requests by the clerks, this information has not been forthcoming. In correspondence with the clerks, the petitioners state that the Minister has not yet provided a substantive response on a number of points, including the outcome of discussions on parking charges at the Strategic Islands Group's December meeting. As a consequence, the petitioners very strongly request that the committee continues the petition, if necessary, into the next parliamentary session. I think I would want to express a degree of frustration that we've ended in this place. I mean, I do have a concern that provisions that were brought in the 2018 Act do not currently seem to be, they've not yet been enacted, and as a consequence, big decisions are getting made which have an impact on island communities without that impact being thought through. And this is the most obvious one, I guess, that an island community is being charged with car parking to use a lifeline service, and that doesn't. I think the committee has agreed that this really doesn't make any sense. But we don't have the information in order for us to make a decision about what we can do next, and I think that is really disappointing. And I do think we'll probably have to continue this petition and write to the Minister. But I'll call members for their views, and start with David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. This is a really important petition for island communities, and like yourself, I think we need to keep this petition open. We have not got the relevant information that we need to make a decision as a committee, and I think we should write to the Minister of Energy and Islands seeking for an update on the discussions that took place in the Islands Strategic Group on the 9th of December, because I'm extremely disappointed that information has not been given to CLARS or to the committee. So I think we should continue the petition and write to the Minister for an update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason?
I'd agree with that, and we don't have the information we need to make the decision or to close this off, so we need to keep it open and write to the Minister, get the information we've been asking for.
Okay, thank you. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Absolutely agree with that course of action. We definitely need to know what the outcome of that meeting was before we can take this any further. So, yeah, write to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maurice Corrie?
Points, and keep this open and get the information from the Minister and write to him.
Okay, thank you. I think there is clear agreement on the response in this, and it hasn't taken terribly long, but I don't think that's because we understand the seriousness and importance of the issue. So just a degree of frustration that we can't actually progress it at this point. But we will write to the Minister asking for that information. If we can now move to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1775, introduce statutory allergy care legislation in nurseries and schools, lodged by Katrina Drummond. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to pass legislation that will make an allergy care policy statutory for every nursery and school, and to establish appropriate standards for nursery and school staff, medical training, education and care for children with anaphylaxis. Since the last consideration of the petition in October 2020, the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills has responded to the petitioner's call for the Scottish Government to standardise its guidance and take the lead on training and implementation. The Deputy First Minister states that under the National Health Service Scotland Act 1978, during the medical inspection, medical supervision and treatment of children and young people at school is a statutory responsibility of NHS boards. In discharging this duty, boards must work collaboratively with education authorities, schools and partners to implement the guidance and provide appropriate levels of training. The Deputy First Minister reiterates that, as a result, sufficient provision is already in place to make clear where responsibility lies. In her response, the petitioner agrees that current legislation and guidance is appropriate, but remains concerned about how it is being implemented. She believes mandatory training or a step-by-step manual should be introduced. And I do think that's an important and pertinent question. If there is a gap between what the legislation says, what the guidance says, and implementation on the ground, that is a matter of concern. It might be that in closing the petition, if we agree to close the petition, then we can make precisely those points, because there is no doubt that we did get a substantial response from the Deputy First Minister, but really to highlight this concern that there is a continuing gap between the two, and that would allow, that would be something that we would want him to reflect on. I'll call Tom Mason.
I think we've explored this as far as we can, and we've got, as you say, substantial information back as to what the standards are. If there is lack of implementation in the process, that's, if you like, an indicative process, and I think we need to see on closing and however, writing to the minister to indicate clearly there is a gap, and then the petitioner can come back with a further petition if that gap is not closed in due course.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, convener. This is yet again another petition, and we see them all the time where the practical doesn't live up to the policy, and even the petitioner themselves say that the legislation and the guidance is appropriate. So, that's all well and good, but the concern about it being implemented, and I just think that this is such an important subject. I mean, it literally is life and death for some people. I think that there needs to be, I mean, it's really difficult to know how if guidance and policy is in place, schools and educational establishments actually are implementing it properly. I do believe that there's a pilot scheme between the University of Glasgow and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, where they work with schools to advise on the management of pupils with allergic disease. And it's always good to see a pilot taking place. It's even better to see a pilot taking place that's successful and then is rolled out nationally. So I think that, I do think as a committee, Tom Mason is absolutely correct. We have taken this as far as we can take it. But in closing, I would also, I would write to the Deputy First Minister to ask that the Scottish Government engages in this pilot if they haven't done so already, because I think that would be a really important thing to be seen nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. I agree fully with Gail Ross's points and my colleagues, and I think we need to ensure that the pilot scheme results of it, hopefully a positive, are rolled out throughout Scotland with the education authorities. But also, I do think that the government should ensure through the education departments that they do periodic checks with schools, that these policies are being implemented, and obviously that the head teachers are fully understanding of it, and obviously making sure they've got the right trained staff in place, or if staff need training in first aid and these issues, then they must do so immediately. And as Gail Ross says, it's a matter of life and death in some cases, and we can't afford it to go wrong. So I'm happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 on notwithstanding the points I've made and all my colleagues have made as well.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, convener. I'm happy to agree with my colleagues and close the petition under Standing Rule 15.7. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is agreement to close the petition, but recognising that the fundamental challenge here is to make sure that on the ground, in schools and elsewhere, that people are confident that there is policy in place and that people know in practical terms how to implement that. And as a consequence, we would want to write to the Deputy First Minister to highlight that point, and also to ask, as Gail has suggested, that they engage with the work of the pilot, which I think sounds as if it's really important. And I agree completely that the pilot in itself is one thing, but to make sure that we learn from a pilot and then we see it rolled out, I think would give us a lot of confidence. I think Tom, sorry I didn't call you, Tom Mason.
A further point, I think this is typical of the case of in implementation of policies. the central government can construct all the regulations and things. The implementation is locally based, and this is an area where the local councils should be sticking their oar in to make sure that their departments do follow the rules as applied, and take on board best practice where appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that there's a challenge on all sides, and the policy developers need to make sure they've thought about implementation, and those who are going to have then responsibility for implementation need to be supported to do so. And that's a much wider and more substantial question about the role of local government and the way in which, or any other agent, or the role of local government in particular, but certainly other bodies, whether they're willed and means to deliver on the policies that have been developed is actually quite important as well. But that's perhaps another discussion for another time. But I think we are agreeing, however, to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, that there are sufficient standards, provision and guidance for local authorities and so on, but that because of this concern about the gap between policy and implementation, we will be writing to the Deputy First Minister to raise those points, but also specifically to urge them to engage with the pilot that has been progressed. And we would want to thank the petitioner very much for all the work that's been done to bring this very important issue before us and highlighting these really important matters. The next continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1780, consultation on the closure of large shops on New Year's Day, lodged by Stuart Forrest on behalf of USDL. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to launch a consultation on implementing legislation already in place to ban large shops from opening on New Year's Day. Following our last consideration of this petition in December 2020, the committee wrote to the Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills to ask whether the Scottish Government intended to take action to ban large shops from opening on New Year's Day from 2021. The Minister provided a response the following day and has subsequently provided another submission. Both detail why the Scottish Government could not take action to ban large shops from opening on New Year's Day 2021. These submissions also explain that the Minister is engaging directly with unions and retailers about the action called for in the petition. The petitioner accepts that legislation was not possible in time for the 1st of January 2021. Nonetheless, it calls on the Scottish Government to act quickly to ensure that a ban could come into force ahead of New Year's Day 2022. I think this is, again, a really important petition. I'm probably the only member of the committee who was actually here when this legislation went through, and it has always disappointed me that the second bit of it was never enacted. And I do think, as I think we discussed the last time this petition was before us, if there was ever any doubt about the importance of retail staff, shop workers, and a recognition of the pressure they're under when shops are open 24 hours a day and they're open all public holidays and so on, that in a pandemic we've seen it even more. And sadly, also the abuse that sometimes they're also treated to, and it does seem like a fairly basic thing that we could maybe survive one day without the shops being open. But I guess I think I am encouraged by the fact the Minister says he's working directly with the trade unions, and that they are working towards addressing this question. And so, I certainly think that it's possible to close the petition, recognise the commitment, and to emphasise to the petitioner that they, of course, can come back with a further petition. And it would need to be reasonably early, so we didn't then get an argument again about, oh, well, we can't do this because we don't get enough time. So on that basis, I think my own view is that we understand why the petitioner and the union has pushed this case, why they won the argument to a large extent with many groups. There will be some who don't agree, but it would be really important that that dialogue between the Minister of Business and the unions continues. And I'll call Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Absolutely correct that we need to value all our retail workers, and having worked in retail myself, I know that it can be immensely rewarding but also a very demanding job as well. I'm confident, given the Minister's replies, that talks are ongoing with all interested parties, and that gives me enough comfort to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and to thank the petitioner and everybody that works in retail for keeping us going. Thank you.
Thank you. Maurice Corey?
Thank you, Rena. Yes, I would endorse what Gail Ross has just said, and thank our shop workers, staff. It's been amazing what they've done through what is really a very difficult time, and I commend them for the work and the hard work, the support of their families as well. Yes, I see now that, and I agree with my colleagues, is to close this petition under Standing Order 15.7 as my decision. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. I fully support the petition as somebody that believes that our New Year tradition has been eroded by the big supermarkets or the big shops for the sake of profit. I believe that the shop workers should actually traditionally get that off. I'm happy to close the petition because progress has been made, but write to the petitioner advising them that they can bring this back in the new Parliament if they feel that it's not going fast enough. I'm fully supportive of this petition. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom?
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, the understanding is that the government is talking to the unions and the retailers generally. I only hope that when we get round to next year, there will be retail left with the pandemic going on as it is. But I think closing is the right thing to do at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that there is agreement recognising, that, as I said, that there has been progress. These are really important issues, and in the last point Tom Mason makes, it will be interesting to see what happens. I mean, there are so many areas that the pandemic has had such an impact on, but it's hard to imagine what the world is going to look like, I guess. I just hope that whatever happens, there's sufficient respect for those who've kept the shops open, that some of the issues that they've had to deal with in the past will be a thing of the past. Just before we move to the next petition, can I just remind members, if they want to contribute other than when I've called them, just to put an R in the chat box, and that makes sure I don't miss you, and to make sure that people are wanting to come back in. I think that's probably certainly would help me very much indeed. If we can move to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1789, Learning Difficulties and Disability Qualifications, lodged by James A. Mackey on behalf of the 1673 Network. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to increase the number of professionals such as speech and language therapists, educational psychologists, physiotherapists, psychiatrists and occupational therapists qualified to assess children and parents with learning disabilities or difficulties and other behavioural problems to reduce the number of children taken into care. This petition was last considered by the committee on 9th of December 2020. Since that meeting, responses have been received from the Minister for Mental Health and the petitioner. In her submission, the Minister provides further detail regarding how the promise will operate. She also outlines Scottish Government strategies for addressing the issues raised in the petition and the timescales involved. In his response, the petitioner states that he believes the promise is a delaying tactic and that more resources are needed now. I think that there's certainly been a lot of recent coverage of the promise, and I think there's a lot of people looking very, very closely at this. I think there's an oversight board being established, and it's my sense that the demands of the promise and the work there is pretty deep-rooted, and I think that it would be they're actually looking to try and sort the whole picture, which certainly gives me some comfort. But I'm going to call members. First of all, Maurice Corey.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I concur with your comments you've just made in relation to this petition, and I'm satisfied that the Scottish Government's promise to be implemented is deep-rooted. It seems to be pretty comprehensive. Nevertheless, I do think it's so important that we do address the needs of our pupils in schools and with learning issues and behavioural issues, and it's so important. And as I have my wife is a classroom assistant in SEN as well. I understand these problems, but I do think at the same time is that I don't think we can achieve any further with this petition. As I say, the Minister has outlined the Scottish Government strategy for addressing the issues associated with children and parents with learning disabilities and difficulties, other behavioural problems. And I would concur with that, and I think I would propose that we close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders.
Thank you. David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. I agree with my colleague that we should close the petition under 15.7 of Standing Orders. I think the Scottish Government's commitment to the issues is there for everybody to see, and if they do not progress, the petitioner always has the opportunity in the new Parliament to bring a petition back if it doesn't feel it's going well enough. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I mean, the government has shown its commitment and does have a strategy for dealing with this issue. And I think we've done what we can do at the moment, and therefore to close the petition and recognising that the petitioner could come back later with another petition should the government not fulfil its promises. Thank you.
Thank you. And Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Agree with my colleagues. Nothing further to add.
Okay. In that case, I think we are agreed that there's a really important set of issues here, and that driven by people with lived experience of all these challenges, there has been a big step forward by the government, and the test will be for the government to prove that it's not a delaying tactic, but that in fact is something which is very serious. But I think there are a number of people who are involved in this who themselves want to make sure that it works and won't allow that to happen. But or will certainly do their best. And if there are problems, of course, the petition route is the one that could be considered in the future. I think we are agreeing to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, and we want to thank the petitioner very much for engaging with the committee on this important issue. If we can move to the next continued petitioner agenda today, which is petition 1820, Compulsory Bereavement Education in Schools by Samin Javid. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to introduce compulsory bereavement education into the school curriculum. Since the committee's last consideration, submissions have been received from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. The Scottish Government notes the Scottish curriculum is designed to allow schools flexibility to decide what to study against the experiences and outcomes. It also details the key priorities for the new National Bereavement Coordinator, and that the National Coordinator will be building on initial engagement through the roundtable discussions to formulate recommendations on how to develop a proposal for a curriculum around bereavement. The petitioner notes the curriculum is flexible, and although schools are encouraged to do their own thing, it is their view that many schools and councils are still choosing not to teach children about death and bereavement. Again, I think this is an important issue, and we're certainly very grateful again to the petitioner for having brought this to our attention. The issue of supporting young people who experience bereavement, who are going through the trauma of all that, is really important, and we would hope that schools would understand that. And also I think that the other point that's been flagged up here is the way in which we actually not just respond to a bereavement and try to support a young person, but for young people themselves to be aware of these issues and to have an understanding of its impact. I am encouraged by the fact that we have a new National Bereavement Coordinator. I think the challenge is to ensure that staff members are supported in schools to do that important job of responding to young people who are dealing with bereavement, but also to ensure that it's part of the discussion that is ongoing around personal and social education. But I'll call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Like yourself, I feel this petition has progressed around the issues of bereavement. What's really reassuring for me is the National Bereavement Coordinator is undertaking work with the schools and with the petitioner directly to develop a curriculum around bereavement with a roundtable evidence sessions due to start in January. So for me, I'm quite happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders because there is progress around this, and the curriculum for excellence, it's up to schools to progress their own curriculum. So I don't think you can enforce it on them. So I'm happy to close the petition.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, convener. Yes, it's good that this petition has been brought, and we've managed to establish clearly what is going on. The government does have a strategy. It has instigated a national bereavement coordinator and roundtable discussion. And I think we have to see what progress now is being made, and therefore closing it is right. And then the petitioner, if nothing happens correctly, can come back with a further petition. Should the government not fulfil its undertakings. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thanks, convener. Again, a really extensive issue, and I mean, death and bereavement tends to be something that we handle after the event rather than speaking openly about it, just in general day-to-day life. I think it's really up to all of us to be talking to children about it. I was struck by the CHAS evidence that said that, you know, there's a lot to do with teacher confidence about speaking about things like this as well. So I think that the correct place for it is probably in PSE, where you deal with all these sort of life situations, death situations. So yeah, I'm as my other colleagues have said, I think it's positive that there is a national bereavement coordinator. I think more work needs to be done to get it into general conversation and not just dealing with it when it happens. So I'm happy enough that there are things being taken forward. But again, I would suggest that the petitioner could bring it back if they don't believe that the progress that they're looking for has been made sufficiently, but to thank them for bringing this forward to us. And again, it's another topic and issue that was certainly not on my radar until it was brought forward, but it is a really, really important issue. So I wait to see how that progresses within the Curriculum for Excellence. But I would suggest that we've taken it as far as we can at the moment, so I would agree to close under Rule 15.7. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maurice Corrie.
I agree with what my colleagues have said already, and in particular what Gail Ross has said. And I think it's important to continue the conversation within the Curriculum for Excellence at schools. And also I'm delighted to see that the National Bereavement Coordinator is undertaking work with schools and the petition directly. So I think the petition needs to keep an eye on the progress. But I think at this point, I recommend that we close the petition under 15.7 of Standing Orders.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that there is a consensus that we recognise the importance of these issues. We have got a confidence that is on the radar of government, and we wish the National Bereavement Coordinator well in taking this work forward, building confidence at a local level to make sure that young people can be supported, and also it is part of their conversation in their lives ahead of any tragedy or loss of bereavement. I think that it's an important issue, but we are agreeing to close the petition on those grounds, and we'd want to thank the petitioner very much indeed for bringing it to our attention. The next continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1836, expand the remit of the Care Inspectorate to investigate individual child protection complaints lodged by James A. Mackey. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to expand the remit of the Care Inspectorate to investigate individual child protection complaints. Since our last consideration of this petition in December 2020, the petition has received submissions from the Promise, the Scottish Public Service Ombudsman, and the petitioner. The SPSO explains that it can investigate social work and make findings and recommendations about service delivery of processes and procedures. It can also challenge the merits of professional decisions made by social workers and others exercising social work functions. It states that while it considers that improvements could be made, it does not believe that these lie in increasing the complexity of the accountability structure. Instead, the SPSO believes that this should be addressed by improving and adequately resourcing existing systems to ensure timely, good quality support is available for children and families, and that agencies collectively improve our approach to information sharing to support systemic improvements. The promise agrees that Scotland must shift its accountability structures. However, it states that making only this change and adding it onto the existing ineffective system is insufficient, as what is required is fundamental change in the way care services are designed, delivered and scrutinised. In his submission, the petitioner reiterates that in his experience, the current system does not work in practice. I am encouraged by the response from the Promise and the SPSO that they do think there needs to be a fundamental overhaul, and I find their argument that adding further complexity to the current system is not the way to address these deeper problems, and therefore I would certainly support closing the petition on those grounds. But I shall call members, and I'll call Tom Mason first.
Yes, Convener. Yes, it seems that the petitioner has some particular bad experiences, and it's not recognised as being a general problem. And there is a strategy in place which is taking place by the government, and I think we're not going to get the petitioner to agree that the government is doing the right thing. However, unless the government does come along with changes, we're going to have an impasse. Therefore, I think the only thing to do is to close this petition, and then if things don't improve, then the petitioner can come back with a further petition in due course.
Thank you. And Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree the Scottish Government doesn't support the action called for because it believes it would pose a risk to local accountability and multi-agency working. There are existing powers and duties in place to investigate the complaints, and also key stakeholders don't support the action, so I agree to close under 15.7. Thank you.
Maurice Corrie.
With my colleagues in closing the petition under Rule 15.7 standing orders, but I think obviously in doing so, it's important to note that the government has put into place various systems, but we must make sure those systems work when it's incumbent on the government to ensure this happens. So at the moment, my view is to close the petition under 15.7 of standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Considering that the Scottish Government does not support the petition and the key stakeholders don't support what's called for in the petition, I'm quite happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of standing orders.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is a consensus then that while there are clearly issues in the process and systems which have been acknowledged, there is not an agreement on the option that the petitioner has argued for, and therefore we are agreeing to close the petition on those grounds on Rule 15.7 of standing orders, but to thank the petitioner very much for engaging with the committee. The next continued petition on our agenda today is petition 1837, Provide Clear Direction Investment for Autism Support by Stephen Layton. The petition calls the Scottish Government to clarify how autistic people who do not have a learning disability and/or mental disorder can access support, and allocate investment for autism support teams in every local authority or health and social care partnership in Scotland. Since the committee's last consideration of this petition, we have received written submissions from a large number of stakeholders and people directly affected by the issues raised, and these are summarised in the clerk's note. The majority of these submissions raise concerns with the support services that are available to autistic people, in particular autistic people without a learning disability. Since the publication of our papers, the clerks have received correspondence from the petitioner. In this, he states that submissions are reflecting heavily on a commissioner role, whereas he would like focus to remain on the action called for in the petition, to recognise the need for direction on who provides autistic support, especially for people who do not have a learning disability or mental health concern, and investment for local autism support teams in every health and social care partnership. The petitioner further states that this approach would use the recommendations of the micro-segmentation report to save hundreds of millions of pounds each year. We are very grateful for all the people who responded to this petition, and I think we're all very aware that the whole question of autism is a really important one, and there's a lot of interest in it in the Parliament and in the current report of new proposals around potentially a commissioner role. But I think the focus of the petition, and the petitioner is quite right to highlight this, there's a particular group of people who do not feel that they're getting the support that they need because they do not have a learning disability. And I think that question for me still remains unanswered, and I think we need to think about what the options are in terms of taking the petition forward. I think it continues to be a question that we would hope that could be continued to be looked at, and it may be that this is one where our legacy paper may provide a route forward, but I'll be interested in what members have to say, and I'll call Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. Hugely important petition, and the amount of people and organisations that have given us evidence has been amazing, and it all goes along the same thread. Just to refer to a couple of points that we've got in our papers, ARCH, which is the Autism Resources Coordination Hub, states it's gravely concerned that Autism Network Scotland has been informed it will no longer receive Scottish Government funding from 2021. It's various ones about funding which are quite worrying. I think that there was one from Deborah McKenna that says there's no quick fix. It needs a whole system change in the approach that is taken to autism support. And also this one from the petitioner themselves, which is, I think, gets to the absolute crux of the matter, which is that mental health services decline to support because they claim autism is not a mental disorder, and they will signpost autistic people to either learning development services or social work services, who then say that they can't take them on because they have said that the Scottish Government have defined it as a mental disorder. So it just seems to be going round and round and round the bushes here, which is just not good enough for these people. I would absolutely agree that this is so important. It needs to be in the legacy paper, and I would expect the next petitions committee to be asking the new Cabinet Secretary to come in as a matter of urgency on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maurice Corrie?
Yes, I agree with Gail Ross at this stage, and to carry out the actions that's been suggested, and I have no further comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. I agree with my colleagues. Because of a number of concerns raised and the evidence that we've taken, I think we've got to keep this petition open, and like my colleague says, new Parliament, call the Cabinet Secretary in as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tom Mason?
Yes, Convener, yes, I agree with my colleagues. I mean, we have a great deal of information, all of which takes us round in circles, and I think we need to take this forward, or it needs to go into the next Parliament to take forward to resolve some of the issues, and certainly we need evidence from the Minister in the new government as we go forward. So keeping it open is the only thing to do at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there is a consensus that there is a very strong argument for continuing the petition and including it in our legacy paper to highlight to the successor committee. I think, as Gail Ross outlined, the frustration of being in a position where wherever you go or you're directed to get support, you're told that's not the place you should be, and there would be a concern that people are therefore falling through the cracks and not getting the support that they need. So, and I think that that issue is a really important part of any of the discussion around autism more generally, but the petition is very clear that that's the focus that they want to have on it. So we are agreeing to continue the petition and include it in our legacy paper for the successor committee, and suggesting that the evidence should be taken from the new Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport on the various concerns raised in the written submissions received on the petition. If we can now move on to the next continued petition, it's petition 1839, Review Maternity Models in Remote and Rural Areas, lodged by Maria Aitken on behalf of Caithness Health Action Team. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to ask all relevant health boards to review their maternity model to ensure that it meets the needs of remote and rural communities. Since the committee's last consideration of this petition in December 2020, the committee wrote to the Scottish Government to ask when discussions regarding changes in rural service provision and arrangements for obstetric transfers across Scotland and the development of an in utero transfer risk assessment tool would be concluded. In its response, the Scottish Government explained that the current priority for health boards is delivery of essential maternity services and managing the impact of COVID-19. Although development of the in utero transfer risk assessment tool has continued, work on the underpinning protocol has not been able to be progressed. The Scottish Government is therefore unable to commit to firm timescales for this work, although it's still expected to be a deliverable of its best start approach. The submission also notes the Maternity Transport Group, which has been set up to develop the tools and protocols required to ensure rural and remote staff are supported in their decision to transport pregnant women, and that the correct medical expertise is involved. A late submission has been received from Edward Mountain MSP, in which he suggests that the Scottish Government response would be, quote, cold comfort to pregnant women who have to be blue lighted to centralised hospitals due to lack of local facilities. He acknowledges that with the parliamentary term coming to an end, there may be little more the committee can do with this petition, but stresses the problem has not gone away. Rhoda Grant, MSP, was hoping to attend. However, she is now unable to join us owing to other commitments and has provided the following statement. A total of 90% of Caithness women currently give birth in Rigmore Hospital, over 100 miles away in Inverness, and really that needs to be addressed. There has never been a risk assessment on emergency transfers or indeed on the journeys south that pregnant women face, sometimes in appalling weather conditions. A focus group feedback on maternity services in November 2019 found the issue of road and possible ambulance transfer was a huge concern that could not be overemphasised. There was an overriding opinion that many women were requesting an induction or an elective section in order that they could plan their journey and not have the stress and anxiety of undertaking the journey in an unplanned way while in labour. Transferring women in labour by air to Rigmore and also transferring medical experts into Caithness by air also have their problems, which seem insurmountable at the moment. Chat Health campaigners in Caithness, after many years of raising the concerns of parents and their families, are now asking that obstetric support, the community midwife unit based at Caithness General, to provide a 21st century experience for maternity services in the far north. This would need to have the equivalent paediatric support, something that appears never to have been considered. And Rhoda would ask that the committee examine whether obstetric and paediatric support could be put in place at Caithness General, and at the very least, that a risk assessment of emergency services take place. I think this is obviously a very important, a very serious issue. It's probably quite difficult for somebody who lives in the city to understand or recognise the challenge of healthcare in more remote and rural areas. When we have arguments about a hospital being moved a couple of miles in one direction or another, and it can cause huge concern, but in rural and remote areas the scale is on a much greater level. And I guess always the challenge is the gap between providing a local service and ensuring that the staff who are there are sufficiently skilled and experienced in order to deal with emergencies. And I'm sure that is a balance that the health service has to strike every day. And so I'll be very interested in what other members have to say about how they feel this might be taken forward. I think there is a case for closing the petition given what's already been said, but that we may want to just recognise that these issues will be long-standing. But I'll call Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, a very important issue indeed, and particularly for rural areas. Having been a councillor in Argyll and Bute, the islands, I know full well what the problems, and having chaired the health board there that we faced. It's all about confidence for mothers who are expecting babies and to have the full confidence in the health service in their local rural areas. Also that there is a system in place to bring them to a central hub, like in the case of Argyll Mute to Glasgow, or indeed to the Vale of Leven. And this trust and confidence. And I think Edward Mountain and Rhoda Grant hit the nail on the head in their responses just now to the committee and points of great concern. I think it's important that this risk assessment tool that the Scottish Government refers to is very important. I think it's about training in the area. I think it's about making sure that there is a plan B and plan C for mothers if there is a complication. And I know, having a daughter who's about to hopefully have a baby successfully in May, in discussions with her, she has one or two concerns, but nevertheless, I'm sure she'll be fine, God willing. But I think at this stage, the government's given us the assurance that a number of work streams relevant to the petition are underway, and the discussions in regards to any changes that are needed in the rural provision are underway, and also development of the inter-utero transfer risk assessment, which I referred to earlier, is obviously being dealt with as well. I think at the moment, in the current situation, the current petition, I would recommend that we close the petition under Rule 15.7 standing orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has confirmed the points I've made and the number of work streams in place. I still have one or two concerns, but I think it's important that we may make a point of this in the legacy paper, but also for our rural communities, and also that the petitioner is obviously absolutely encouraged to bring a petition back if they feel that there's no progress or little progress being made. But at that point, just now, I think I would propose that it close at this stage for the reasons I've given. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with everything that my colleague Maurice Corries has says, and I'm happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Yeah. Yes, I think the government has demonstrated that there are some work streams in place to address the issues involved with rural services, maternity rural services. There was always going to be a problem, a difficulty to provide services such as maternity over in the rural areas, and there has to reach a consensus as to what can be provided and what can't be, and people must make their choices accordingly. But it doesn't mean to say you ignore the situation, but some understanding and consensus has to be reached. Providing we close this on the understanding that these work streams should continue and that discussions should be taking place, I think that would be the best we can do at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Gail Ross.
Thanks, Convener. I would have liked to have heard back from the petitioners about the evidence that we received the first time round, but we haven't had a submission from them. They did, however, email me, and I asked a question about the aspect of mental health and well-being of expectant and first mothers in the chamber last week. And the Minister for Mental Health replied along the same lines as we have here with the work streams that are going ahead, the transport group and the Best Start, the work on that. A couple of things that I would just like to point out in our papers. Edward Mountain's suggestion about pregnant women who have to be blue lighted from Caithness to Raigmore. The choice basically is if women don't go down to Raigmore and give birth, if they're on a red pathway, they give birth in Caithness. The stark choice is between pregnant women being blue lighted, or once the baby is born, the baby being blue lighted. And that's what was happening before when we had obstetrics with no paediatrics in Caithness General. So the very difficult decision was made that it was better to try and get women that were classed as a red pathway down to Raigmore so that they would be able to give birth safely, and so that the baby wasn't taken away from the mother as soon as it was born, and being put in that distressful situation for everyone. But, you know, I do acknowledge that neither situation is appropriate or indeed desirable for anybody giving birth. Rhoda Grant's comments, the focus group, I'm in discussions with a local councillor about how we take that forward. I think we should note that there was only 5% of women that actually gave birth in the year that they focused on, took part in that. So it would be maybe good to get a more rounded view of the people that gave birth both in Caithness and in Raigmore. And I think that to suggest that the fact, or to make the suggestion that putting obstetricians and paediatricians in Caithness General has never been considered, that's just not factual, I'm afraid. The first report on the change in the obstetrician-led unit into a maternity unit looked at putting paediatricians in, and like I said in my evidence at the last discussion, we would have needed a team of paediatricians that were on rotation, on call. You can't have the paediatricians without all the other stuff that comes with it. Apparently, I'm just telling you what I've been told by the clinicians, and they are the experts. I would absolutely love to be able to see a unit where you had obstetricians and paediatricians in Caithness. If there is any way at all of getting that done, I would have supported it. I will support it going forward if we can find a way to do that. Absolutely. I think that the fact that the NHS Highland have just recently committed to building a new maternity unit in Caithness General means that they are absolutely committed to seeing more babies being born locally. And I think that we should be making sure that other changes are made, if possible, to ensure that happens going forward. I mean, I would fully support another petition coming forward that was more focused on the issues that we are facing in Caithness, whether it's to do with emergency transfers or risk assessments or any of the other actions being called for by Caithness Health Action Team. I would absolutely fully support that. I think with where the petition is at the moment, as a committee, we've had quite a lot back from the Scottish Government and from the Minister, but I certainly, you know, have absolutely no doubt at all that the MSPs from all parties that are delivered in the next term will be following this up. It's an issue that's not going to go away. But I think that we can agree about certain things. There is a lack of communication still, and I think that we need to be going forward together to see if any of these recommendations from the Best Start group or the transfer group can be taken forward to ensure that more babies are born locally in Caithness, because I think that's an aim that everybody aspires to. And if we can get that to happen safely, then I think that that would be a good thing. So I think as a committee, we have no choice but to close it under 15.7, to thank the petitioners and everybody else that's worked on this, and to continue to work together to find a solution for everyone. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I think that is an interesting area where the Petitions Committee is looking at an issue in terms of policy and generally, but there's clearly a very specific local dimension to it, which is obviously not the remit of the Public Petitions Committee, but it's clearly something that is exercised to elected members, and I think certainly we see it across all of the parties really, or three of them anyway. There's clearly been a huge engagement with the specifics of the local area, and we would hope that that matter can be addressed in the way that Gail has outlined. But in terms of what we can do with the petition as is at this stage, I think there is agreement that we would want to close the petition, that the Scottish Government has identified a number of work streams which are relevant to the petition, and that there is an awareness of the issues that this petition has highlighted. On that basis, I think we do want to thank the petitioner for bringing this forward. And of course, we're well aware that this is a campaign and an issue that will continue to be discussed in the future. But we want to thank them for their engagement with us. If we can move to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1840, addressing racism in Scottish education, by Deborah Kayembe on behalf of the Freedom Walk. The petition calls the Scottish Government to urgently address racism in the Scottish education system by implementing anti-racist education in the classroom, delivering anti-racist training to all school staff, and record, monitor and address racist incidents in schools. Since the committee's last consideration of this petition in December 2020, the committee wrote to the Scottish Government seeking its views on the questions raised in the petitioner's submission of 8 December 2020. A detailed response was received from the Scottish Government outlining the training that is currently offered to educators on racism and is summarised in the Clerk's note. The Scottish Government highlights that the issues raised by the petition cannot be tackled in isolation, and that a new programme of work has been initiated and will focus on curriculum reform, diversity in the teaching profession, racism and racist bullying, professional learning and leadership. The Scottish Government advises that monitoring and recording of racist incidents is the responsibility of each school and authority, and that no national guidance is available on the procedures for recording racist incidents. As a result, there is no central monitoring of this data. In their submission, the petitioner highlights that the Scottish Government submission does not mention training for school communities, nor does it mention evaluation of the effectiveness of its programmes. The petitioner also questions why there is a lack of accountability for those who commit racism in the classroom as a hate crime, and reporting and monitoring data is not mandatory. And I think, as in the past, there was a clear recognition of the importance of the issues that were highlighted in this petition. I think it does beg the question, if you can't monitor something because it's not sent, the data is not gathered centrally, is there not a question in whether it should be or not? But that may be something that could be considered in the future. There is also, of course, recognition, I think, that there has been progress. The Scottish Government has recognised the importance of these issues, and has certainly detailed initiatives that would address the question. And yeah, I'd be interested in the views of committee members on this. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. A really important petition. I think it's sad that in modern day Scotland that we're still having to address these issues. But I'm reassured by the very detailed evidence that the Scottish Government gave, especially around the new programme of work focused on curriculum reform and diversity in teaching, and that Education Scotland delivers training at all levels of teaching that supports the development of anti-racist practices, and that schools and local authorities have their own procedures for recording racist incidents, either through their own systems or through the school management information system. I think this all helps, but we need to see how it goes, especially a new programme of work, and if the petitioner feels it's not going far enough and being effective, I would ask him to bring a petition back to the new session of Parliament. Thank you. And I'll close the petition under Rule 50.7 of Standing Orders. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Tom Mason.
Yes, Convener. We've had a lot of information around the petition, and it's evident that the government has made some progress in a number of areas. Still a long way to go, but I think that time will tell as to whether what they're putting into place will be successful. So I think, as far as the committee goes, I think we should close this under 15.7, but we should be writing to the Cabinet Secretary to request that training for school communities in anti-racism education is a top priority as part of the ongoing implementation of all the various strategies. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. A huge amount of evidence back from the Scottish Government, which is reassuring to see, and I I agree with my colleagues. I think that we can now confidently close this petition, but I would also write to the Cabinet Secretary along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Maurice Corrie.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues. I think under Rule 15.7, I would propose that we close this petition.
Okay. I think there is a consensus that we would recognise the importance of the issues that have been flagged up, and that this takes work. The Scottish Government has outlined a programme and it's given us detail on how that be taken forward. But we also want to make sure that the continuing concerns of the petitioner around the issue of school communities and anti-racist education is a top priority. I think we'll be agreeing to write to the Cabinet Secretary on that question, but we would be closing the petition under Rule 15.7. And again, we want to thank the petitioner very much for engaging with the committee and recognising that this is such a serious and important issue. That it's not going to be, it will take a lot of work and effort and serious engagement to make sure that our education system challenges racism wherever it's expressed. Obviously, there's an opportunity if the petitioner so chooses to return to the committee in the new Parliament. We can now move on to the next, I think, final continued petition today, which is petition 1841, Allow a Designated Visitor into Care Homes, lodged by Natasha Hamilton on behalf of Care Home Relatives Scotland. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to allow a designated visitor into care homes to support loved ones. Since the committee's last consideration of this petition in December 2020, submissions have been received from the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland, CCPS, Scottish Care, Anna Sarwar MSP and the petitioner, and these submissions are summarised in the clerk's note. Since the publication of our papers, we have received late submissions from the Cross-Party Group on Dementia and Christine Cusack in support of the petition. We've also received a late submission from the Scottish Government. Anna Sarwar has also been in contact to give his apologies, but he emphasises, as he does in his submission, that he's keen that we look closely at the petition, that after a year we do need a better solution than the one that is being experienced currently. Paula McNeill, MSP, has also been in contact to just express our support for the petition and to say that some of the most devastating cases brought by constituents from families during the pandemic have been from families who find themselves unable to visit loved ones. And we also have a submission from Monica Lennon, MSP, expressing her support for the campaign. In its submission, the Scottish Government states that it is committed to supporting further opportunities for opening up visiting in care homes, emphasising that the recommended restrictions for care homes have been the toughest decisions ministers have had to make. It notes that the Level 4 restrictions announced on 4th January serve as a reminder of the importance of balancing the welfare of residents and allowing people to visit safely, but stresses that these restrictions will not be kept in place any longer than is necessary. The Scottish Government highlights progress of the vaccination programme, with 99.7% of residents in older adult care homes and 93% of residents in all care homes having received the first vaccinations as at 9th February 2021. The Scottish Government also advises that the Cabinet Secretary has met directly with the petitioner and Care Home Relatives Scotland. They have discussed their call for new legislation. However, Scottish ministers believe improvements currently underway present the quickest route to progressing visiting, but that would, quote, explore all options. I think this is a very challenging and important petition, and we know that there are petitions under Change.org and so on as well, which have accumulated a lot of support. But the campaign round this petition, I think, has been very strong. And certainly, I think there's quite a gap, in my view, between what the guidance is and what the reality on the ground is. And having spoken to one person with a loved one in a care home, they made 2 points. One was that if it's supposed to keep older people safe, it does not evidence that has actually worked. and it doesn't seem to be the same progress now that vaccination is in place, and that even where care homes are allowing visits, they're under conditions which to me feel far from what anybody's intended. The phrase that was used to me, it was like a reptile house where you go in, the carer comes in one side, the loved one comes in the other, but it's a large sort of perspex screen, which is really the same as being outside, because you can't touch, you can't hold a hand or give the reassurance perhaps that a loved one wants. And that doesn't feel to me to be what anybody thinks the change in rules around the access of a designated visitor to help support the care of a loved one was intended. I don't think that that is the case. And it may be that care homes feel that they've become risk averse just because of the seriousness of the issues. But I think we do need, in my view, we need to find a way of highlighting to the government the scale of people's anxiety and distress about this, and that caution in these circumstances is causing a scale of distress that perhaps is only imaginable to some of us who are not in that position. I'd be interested in what other members have to say in this. I know that we've had a lot of external interest in it, but I note also that Neil Findlay will come back for this discussion. I will obviously come round all of the members, but I'll take Neil Findlay first and make sure that we all have an opportunity to reflect on what can be done with this petition. Neil Findlay.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks for the committee for having a bit of time this morning. I think the situation is that care home residents, families, and indeed members who have been working on this from the very start of the pandemic have done everything possible. A bit like the previous petition I spoke about, they've only come to the petitions committee because of it. They've tried speaking, tried petitions, they've tried we've all seen the emotive pictures of people outside care homes looking through windows at their loved ones in desperation at trying to have some contact with them. And I don't think they brought this petition before the committee lightly. We have had several meetings with the Cabinet Secretary for Health and pleaded with the government. And, I don't plead with the government often, but I have pleaded on this one because it is such an appalling situation for there to be some progress. And what we have is a situation where infection control, infection prevention and control measures haven't been used to facilitate contact, they've been used to prevent contact. And I understand from the care home's perspective, having gone through the crisis where we saw so many people dying, and some of the reported incidents from care homes have been truly appalling. But I understand why they are taking such a precautionary approach. The direction and the advice from government and the guidance from government has been given repeatedly, but very often it bears no relation to the reality on the ground. And there are many families who have not had contact with their loved ones for over a year. In my own situation, my mum is in a care home 100 yards from my house. If one of the staff contracts COVID, then that then puts in place a whole series of actions that means that contact completely stops. I mean, at the moment, my contact is once on a Friday behind a screen for half an hour. That's not normal contact. That's not normal engagement with your loved ones. And I have to say, I do not criticise that care home one bit. But for people who have family who have dementia, where a phone call is completely of no use and where they have not seen the person or been in contact with them for around a year, it must be completely and utterly intolerable. So I think there are very serious issues. The families have done everything possible, and we have had a human rights catastrophe in our care home sector, which is ongoing. And I believe it's incumbent upon the committee to do all it can to get the government to move on this. We've asked for emergency legislation, and I think there would be goodwill across all the political parties in Parliament to make that happen, but there has been resistance to that. And for many of us, we think that all along the government's been sitting it out, waiting on the vaccine, and that has taken some time. So my plea is that the committee does all it possibly can to put pressure on the government to act now, because this is going on far too long. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Neil. Can I say that Tom Mason has had to leave? He has another appointment, and the committee has run on longer than we'd expected, because I think we've been looking at a lot of really important and serious issues. So he has expressed his concern and support, recognising the issues himself, but is unable to contribute at this point. So I'll call Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. It really is a heartbreaking situation. A hugely emotional issue. Doesn't affect me directly, but I have huge sympathy with those that it does affect, and Neil Findlay put his own situation across, and this must affect so many people. I think that, this is an issue that you want your heart to rule your head over, but I mean we all know that these rules and guidance are put in place not to disaffect anyone, but to try and keep people safe. But it's frustrating that the very people that need this contact are the very group that are affected most by this horrible virus. It is an ever-changing situation. I heard Jason Leach, the clinical director, at the briefing either yesterday or the day before, saying that now that the vaccine, the first round of vaccines in care homes is nearly complete, that there would be updated guidance, and that was coming out imminently. So it'll be interesting to see, first of all, what that guidance is, and then how the care homes implement it and how they're able to implement it safely. I wouldn't close this petition just now, because it's such an important petition. Like I say, it is changing all the time. I would want to get the updated position from the Scottish Government, because I would like to see where we are, for us as a committee, and also for everyone, both in care homes and the families of those in care homes that this affects, before we go at the end of the term. And it may well be that this continues on past us as a committee and into the next term. But certainly not closing it just now, right to the government, get the updated position, and then take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I fully agree with what Gail Ross is saying, my colleague there. And also, I'm a member of the COVID committee, so very live to these issues. And she's absolutely right. Professor Leach, Scottish Government, are looking at ongoing advice for visitors to care homes, fully aware of what the situation and the issues with many people with relations, close and otherwise, in care homes. I would advocate that we keep this petition open. I think it is important because we need to get the updates from Professor Leach and the Scottish Government as to where we are, and new advice as that comes through and is ongoing, and particularly at this important time, because it is a very difficult situation, and we need to think very carefully about it for the families, the residents, and people visiting the care homes, bearing in mind also the issues about protecting people from the virus and any question of passing it on in any shape or form. So I would propose that we keep this petition open, Ms. Convener.
Thank you. And David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. A really important petition and something that's very emotional in family members' hearts and their feelings about it and their loved ones. I think we need to keep the petition open because we need to see what the updated advice is from the government and where this is going to be resolved and how it's going to be resolved. And until then, we have to keep the petition open. Convener, thank you.
Thank you very much. It does seem to me that there's a degree of urgency about this because, and I think we should be writing directly to Professor Leach as well as the Cabinet Secretary saying just how urgent we think this is, and to emphasise, if people in the committee don't agree with me, please we can come in and discuss it, that it is unacceptable to define as access, changed access to loved ones in care to be some of the examples that we've been given, which in no set of circumstances could be described as any kind of change, is simply, devising means by which you still are very separated from the designated carer. I was very struck. I'm not sure if everybody got the email, but one person emailed me who's in fact responsible for, I think, the Change.org petition, and she made to me what was a really powerful point. That very often loved ones go into a care home with the reassurance that it will be treated as their home. But in fact, as things have changed for the rest of us in our homes, when there was restrictions were lifted, that didn't happen in care homes. And I think the concern behind that for me is that the government wants to try and manage risk as much as possible. And this is a group whose risk they can manage in a way that they can't manage the risk that we all present every time we go to a shop, or lockdown is reduced a bit. And I found that just a very important thing to understand, that simply because somebody's in a care home shouldn't mean that because they are as a group or as an institution, if you might want to say, more easily managed, that actually some of their rights and the difficult issues around exercising their rights are not being tackled. So it's not just for me. I feel strongly that in writing to Professor Leach, or our message from this meeting must be that it's not about, oh well, we will issue guidance. The challenge is to issue guidance that actually makes a difference and makes a change, and that it is not guidance to be circumvented, or where I understand, I think Neil Finlay made the point about the care home. He knows this is not a criticism of care homes, but where people feel risk averse and feel hugely responsible, that they need to know that they have been able to do the right thing because the government has made that very clear to them. So I think we can see the scale of interest in this. We also know this, the word that's probably overused in the pandemic, is unprecedented times. But I think the sense of frustration and distress from families, that actually there is a big gap between people saying we understand there's a problem here, and that then making a specific difference in what they're living with every day. And I would hope that we would agree to write as a matter of urgency to ask the Scottish Government and to ask directly Professor Leach if he would address these concerns that the petition reflects, as well as the more general, something needs to be done about this. I mean, it may be that emergency legislation, it may be that this will come before the Parliament and what's left of the time to us, but the judgment will be, will that make it faster? Because that's what we want. That's what I think we're agreed that we want to see happen. And I wonder if there's anybody wants to make a further comment amongst our members. No. Okay. So in that case, we are agreeing to continue the petition and to write both to the Cabinet Secretary and to Professor Leach to emphasise the concerns that have been expressed to us and the need for urgency in responding to those concerns, that even where there is guidance, if it's not matched by a real difference in the experience of family, then there has been a failure. And if that's acceptable, we will agree to that action and to thank the petitioner for what they have done in this regard, because we know, of course, as with so many of our other petitions, this is driven by direct experience, and it's not easy in the middle of all that also to have to campaign when you're dealing with not being able to support your loved ones in the way that you would want to and would normally be able to do. So with that, can I thank again all our members. I can thank Neil Finlay for attending, and for other members who were out with the committee have engaged today. Thank the clerking team and the broadcasting team for bearing with my poor connection challenges, and on that basis, I'll thank everyone again and close the meeting.